This presentation is entitled Best Practices as a Verb, Not a Noun. I want to thank you for viewing this presentation. This presentation from Radiation Oncology Resources, or ROR as we're most commonly known, is a look at how we define quality in medical dosimetry and how the most recent 2012 ROR Plan Challenge ties into that. And looking beyond, we're going to examine the current and future state of best practices as it relates to medical dosimetry. As the announcements alluded to preceding this live presentation, the purpose of this particular one in regards to the plan challenge was to provide a broad overview of the scoring metrics, the data, and a common theme to all of the plans that were submitted. We also wanted to discuss the evolution of the plan challenge benchmarks into our ROQS continual improvement program, demonstrate the value of that program as a comprehensive system of assessing, benchmarking, learning, and improving really in medical dosimetry. And finally, we wanted to recap the highlights from this year's AAMD National Meeting in Atlanta, Georgia. The undercurrent to all of these key points is asking the question, what is quality? And ultimately, as professional treatment planners, how we should and currently define it as a community. As this picture represents, best practices could be viewed as a journey with an end-state goal, where achieving those best practices is a discovery with, the way we like to look at it, 4 key or main points along the way. Benchmarking is not best practices, but an essential ingredient. And when you ask the question, what is benchmarking? Benchmarking it involves a regular, systematic measuring of products or services against those of the recognized best practitioners in the world. And the key word there is measuring. So benchmarking analysis can even provide metrics by which an organization can measure its successes or its failures. Ultimately, benchmarking should provide some type of learning and sharing tool that continually improves processes. That's really the ultimate goal with the approach, and in our case, that's going to be patient outcomes. So really, best practices could be thought of as something to achieve, an obtainable endpoint of a journey. When you think about best practices, it's synonymous with quality. ROR and our new mission has evolved from just providing dosimetry services over the years. We have really grown into more of a professional services organization mindset to discover ways to try to assess variability, develop opportunities for partnering with our peers, and provide mechanisms or services for continual improvement. But back to this journey of towards best practices, as with any trip, we need to map out where we're going and make sure the path is leading us where we anticipate accomplishing those end-state goals. In other words, if we're to take any journey, we don't want to get lost or waste our time. We definitely want to be cautious of any obstacles that will inevitably be in our way that could distract us or slow us down. So awareness and preparation can help us in any successful journey. And again, in this case, we're discussing a journey towards that best practices and improving patient outcomes. As with any trip, ending up off course is easy to do, and any good voyage with a worthwhile destination, such as achieving best practices, is never easy. Many times we end up somewhere undesirable or a place we did not intend on going. Ultimately, it is critical to make sure everyone is on the same page, committed to the destination, and not going to be surprised by the potential difficulty that lies in getting there. The way we viewed this trip towards best practices was really looking at 4 key or main milestones along the way. So this first step, this planning phase, is perhaps the most important, most difficult, and most time-consuming activity in this total process of collecting information. And some of the questions to consider when we're in this planning phase is, what is a good treatment plan? Is there consistency industry-wide? And what ultimately defines that quote-unquote good plan or quality? And many times it's not always easy to gather authentic information, especially in this field. Publications are typically slow to evolve from one institution, and in terms of dosimetry, filled with many subjective or unknown variables. The preparation for collecting necessary information has to be planned in such a way that it provides authentic data with all of the necessary details and within a reasonable time frame. We can't discuss best practices until we discuss quality. In the past year, there's been a lot of talk about quality in radiation oncology. And when you think about quality in advertising, or how institutions advertise to potential customers, hence the billboard metaphor, typically it's common to advertise some piece of new technology, images of the people that work there, well-established academic name. The ultimate goal with all of this is to send a message that if you're treated at our center, you will receive the highest quality of care possible. A good message to send. And so when you peel away the layers and talk about contouring and treatment planning in radiation oncology, as clinicians, how are we defining that quote-unquote quality? In other words, do we even need to take this journey? Is the need for establishing best practices a priority? And probably the better question is, has it already been accomplished? A true best practices program involves cooperation from everyone, especially top management. So before we start suggesting that everyone should implement a best practices or evaluation program, we need to really ask, how do we know we even need one? And the answer really lies in, or could be attributed to, one word. And that one word is variability. Variability is well documented in this field, especially for contouring and treatment planning. This variability can be inter-clinician, inter-institution, dependent on a variety of factors. And as many publications have already pointed this out, contouring especially can be highly variable, as this slide here alludes to, in this study that came out of the Medical College of Wisconsin, which showed high degrees of variability with contouring breast tissue, both with the organs at risk and with the targets for a standard practice with treating breast cancer. As this study pointed out, there was a 10% structure overlap with some of the contours and a 60% standard deviation. And again, there's many studies on the subject of contouring variability. We performed our own study. This publication from 2009 that was published in the Red Journal analyzed variation of various organs at risk delineated on the same data set by clinicians via our contouring challenge project. Overall, we were able to ascertain through our analysis software measurable differences in voxels included or excluded on a variety of structures. Those included the pelvis, the head and neck, and the brain, and ultimately provided a quantified score to those contours. The results were really not that surprising. About the only thing that we could agree on as an industry was that the rectum should be brown and the bladder colored yellow. And as you can see from this slide here, some of the structures were noticeably more highly variable than others, such as the parotid, the rectum, and the larynx. We've even heard statements as we developed studies like this and reported the information that we were somehow just inventing a problem. And a common response to talking about contouring variability within departments is, well, we already have tools to address this problem. We have software, autoseg platforms that are in place to address this. And really, this is a common myth that technology will solve all of the problems. For instance, we just purchased ... that will take care of our variability or our lack of consistency in our department. And although technology is important and has improved quality and dependability tremendously, to achieve true best practices for contouring and treatment planning, the answer really could be much simpler. As this study here exhibits, a potential solution in developing a metric-based learning program to lead quality improvement results, again by using defined metrics and a teaching intervention, the results showed consistent improvements in expected results, and this study was pulled from the University of Southern Illinois. What this one study here demonstrates is that we can be successful regardless of the variability that exists up front. They experience a 20 to 30% improvement in accuracy simply with having this metric-based analysis and a teaching intervention. So regardless if it is a dosimetrist, a physician, someone that's clinical or non-clinical, we, that is human beings, will be an integral part of this radiation oncology process regardless of that great technology that gets implemented. So benchmarking is that critical first step of a best practices or approach or a program. We now know why, and that is for the most part due to this idea of variability. So the logical next question is, who and what needs to be benchmarked? This is a diagram that we've used many times. When you look at these processes in blue, if you are evaluating a department where you wanted one of your loved ones or family members treated, you would want every component across the board to be of the highest quality. And again, quality in its simplest form is where the least amount of variability exists and the most efficient processes are present. And so really you can look at all of these silos as different quality opportunities. These quality opportunities have been well researched and documented in imaging, treatment planning system accuracy, and QA through various task groups led by the AAPM and other organizations. With this escalating focus on quality and credentialing, such as the ACR, an examination of all of these silos is becoming increasingly important. We know that the first two are the most subjective to variability, inefficiency, and lack of this quantitative assessment. And this is unfortunately true even with credentialing, accreditation, or quality auditing processes that are in place. And so what are the implications of these inconsistencies with contouring, and are all plan acceptance criteria consistent across the board? Those are good questions to ask. So based on what we know regarding who and what needs benchmarked in the radiation oncology department, to establish consistency or reduce variability for contouring and treatment planning, where do we look for answers when we get started? The common place that we typically lean as clinicians or administrators for those answers is the process of getting certified, the world of academia, professional organizations, and even reading scholarly articles and textbooks. As important as these things are, is it providing the principles for establishing these best practices in a quantitative way? In other words, can we do more? When it comes to having a true self-assessment as a professional treatment planner, what are the avenues currently available? As part of that self-assessment, how do you remove subjectivity in these highly variable points of discussion? In the movie Moneyball, Brad Pitt plays a baseball general manager who has been tasked with developing a team with no money. In order to compete, he is forced to think outside the box based on philosophies written in this manifesto called the Sabermetric Manifesto. A gentleman by the name of Bill James was really on a search for some objective knowledge about baseball, and thus using metrics on skills not common to analyzing players historically, they built a team of unknowns and went on to have this historic season. And this isn't meant to detract or discredit the value of treatment planning by comparing it to a sport. The story is really a metaphor for using metrics and how we as clinicians can use those to quantitatively assess plan quality and contour quality. In other words, by using quantified metrics, we can have analysis through objective evidence. We can remove subjectivity, and like any good researcher or scientist, it will lead us to ask better questions. We might not have all of the answers, but we know we're asking better questions. And we've seen that through the plan challenges that we've been running. Ultimately, we can provide opportunities for measured improvement, because the bottom line is you cannot improve what you do not measure. Now, improving the overall quality of any product, more specifically plan evaluation, must involve systematic improvement by using quality metrics, and this was stated in this article here entitled Quantitative Metrics for Assessing Plan Quality from WashU. It goes on to say that if we truly care about standardizing, benchmarking, and reducing variability, we really need to be using metrics. And they go on to say, and really provide this very bold statement, that common metrics and standards do not exist. They vary from institution to institution, and they're a function of the technological capabilities coupled with a desire to standardize and adopt procedures. And that is one of the reasons with things like a plan challenge, it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to provide one standard recipe that is comprehensive and will guarantee scores for each planner or planning system. What we do know is the universal recipe currently does not exist, and there's more on that later, but even though there are many ways to approach the same plan, and that's one of the reasons we love dosimetry here, is that by incorporating metrics, we can not only determine what is truly achievable, but we can also look at ways to increase efficiency. Now, we love the work that the team at MD Anderson, led by Dr. Wexberg and Matt Palmer, are doing with this idea of called class solutions. Now, class solutions is a mindset of using a template or a protocol and some level of automation to quantitatively look at evaluating a plan. The class solutions approach showed that by incorporating this metric-based analysis, you could increase efficiency. And so the goal was not to replace the intelligence or the art of planning that a dosimetrist can provide, but what they're saying is by using metrics you can speed up the process to achieve high quality results. Most importantly, by taking a metric-based approach, we can improve patient outcomes, as this study points out from the University of Michigan. To ensure patients are receiving the true benefits of technology changes, the role of quantitative metrics to assess plan quality is key. By establishing known process controls, we can relate reduction in variability and improvements in that quality to patient outcomes. When we started this idea of using our own PQMs or plan quality metrics, and we'll describe this in greater detail later, at first we weren't convinced that it was the right thing to do, at least not for the plan challenges we were hosting. At this point, what I will say is, after spending some time doing the work the last couple years, we're definitely drinking this metric flavored Kool-Aid. It's provided an enhancement to the project, and really this leads us to the second point or milestone on our 4-point journey to best practices. This particular step is what we call the analysis or the do phase. In other words, after we have established the need and prepared the plan or method for achieving our goals, we need to bring in and analyze the data. And so from there, based on the quantitative analysis in this step, an improvement process can be developed. But first we have to start with this analysis phase. So the second leg of our best practices journey, we look at PQMs, or how we refer to our plan quality metrics, and how we use those to establish objective benchmarks for treatment plan quality. The past 5 years we've been running plan and contour challenges, and the scope of the project has evolved significantly. Over the years, a variety of disease sites and common planning prescriptions have been investigated, including a head and neck, GYN, a brain case, and most recently a prostate fossa case, to name a few. In previous years, we would evaluate each one, some would say subjectively, and on common planning principles such as monitor units, conformity of dose, target coverage was a big one, organ at risk sparing, the list goes on and on. From there we would compile the data on our own internal scoring criteria, and then we would essentially announce a winner. And we have experienced tremendous growth of the project each year. Along the top there you can see the total number of registrants that have registered for this project through each year, and then on the bottom you can see the number of plans that have been submitted back for review. The most exciting part of the scope of the project has been the involvement from countries all over the world, including not just the United States but also Canada, South Africa, Australia, Singapore, and Hong Kong, to name a few. In 2011, we slammed the brakes on our previous ways of doing things and we changed the rules of the plan challenge. For the prostate fossa case, we provided contours not just for the targets but also the organs at risk. Based on some really good feedback from the community, the main one, or the main change that we made, was to provide our objective criteria up front. And although we were really skeptical about doing this and had some hesitancy of being viewed as some sort of authoritative figure opposed to just being interested in benchmarking data and really just investigating community-based best practices, at the end of the day, we decided to change the rules, and we provided that level of information up front. So the data that we collected landed a publication in the Pro Journal. It's in press right now. Anyone that contacts us, we can send you that that detailed publication. By using metrics, essentially, or what we called the planned quality metrics, or PQMs, we could better evaluate variability. And how the PQM is defined is really a total composite score. In other words, the PQM is a list of scoring criteria, or what we refer to as scoring functions, based on well-accepted published metrics. We add some additional metrics such as global max location, evaluations of conformity, peripheral dose evaluations, things like that. The overall purpose of the PQM was an attempt to remove all ambiguity and variation in the assessment of plan quality. So the PQMs used are based on both typical and advanced treatment plan goals, but the clinical validity of the PQM itself, that is the predictor of outcomes, was really not the point. The PQM, the point of it was to act as sort of that virtual physician for the planner with clearly explained and weighted plan goals. The data collected showed a wide distribution of results. Along the x-axis you can see the PQM score, maximum score of 150, which was really unachievable due to all of the trade-offs associated with IMRT or VMAP planning. And along the y-axis was the number of submitted plans that fell into that bucket. And this is just an example of the prostate bed case from last year that shows the max being 142.46, the mean 117, and the standard deviation around 16. What this picture is saying is that based on provided criteria, there was a substantial amount of variability with the outcomes produced. And in addition, we can link these results to various criteria. There was a provided set of pre-survey questions that we could link to these scores that was filled out ahead of time. What this image here is showing, it demonstrates all the various elements of the planning process that we could link to that collected PQM score. So the data can be broken down to planning system, delivery method, whether the individual was CMD certified or not, their educational background, monitor units, number of beams, a whole list of various criteria. So the combination of all of these scoring functions provides a PQM score, and I know this slide is really busy, but this just shows, we'll zoom in on a couple of these in a second. This is just showing the overall scope of what goes into one of our quote-unquote algorithms that we build. This is an example from a head and neck algorithm. 21 metrics were used within this, and again the max possible score was 150. There was heavily weighted target associated metrics along with organ at risk specific metrics. Let's look at a select few of these in greater detail. So this slide here shows the target coverage or target related metrics. The scores were generated based on things like target coverage, maximum dose, uniformity of dose to the PTV and CTV volumes, and there's 4 metrics that describe that there. Various organ at risk scoring functions were also another important element of this particular designed algorithm. Although not weighted as heavily as the targets, they were still important in and of themselves. For the head and neck algorithm, as an example, the right parotid, the very common, well-known salivary function sparing metric around 26 gray, there was associated points not only with hitting that benchmark, but even awarding more points if the dose was driven down further than that. The mandible max dose was a metric that we used. We evaluated the larynx mean dose, and also the global max location that you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. This is what we call a string metric, so it was more of depending on the location of where that global max fell, then a score was awarded. So each one was equipped with a score relative to the dose, volume, or location of whatever that defined parameter was. And so let's run through a quick example. So as you can see, if you were able to achieve 95% coverage on this particular PTV submetric. This was the PTV V70 gray metric. If you achieve 95% volume around that target, you would receive the max allowable points of 15 for this one particular scoring function. And then as you look down, if you achieve 92% coverage, it was more heavily penalized, and then a steep gradient down to 90% where a 0 score, so anything below 90% target coverage, you did not receive any points. Another example, as I mentioned earlier, the right parotid mean dose. So around the V26 benchmark, we established a point there of 5 worth value. Beyond that, you could actually hit a maximum of 7. However, that did impede upon target coverage, and it really became important in the overall PQM score as far as weighing what those trade-offs meant and how hard you really wanted to drive the optimizer or the planning system in order to achieve that. We get asked a lot, are these metrics that you use for your actual clinical plans when you're evaluating those every day? The answer is really sort of yes and no. We designed these particular metrics with the mindset to be challenging and with the philosophy, why put dose where it doesn't need to be? Even though these are clinically relevant, ultimately it is a skills assessment. So based on the things, we really believe based on the things learned in a quote-unquote challenge environment, there's definite carryover to things presented clinically, and you can use a lot of those things every day. This slide here shows a hard constraint on the cord. In other words, it was really pass or fail. We don't use pass-fail metrics very often, but in things like critical organs like the brainstem, the cord, versus quality of life organs like the rectum and the parotid and things like that, we wanted to have a more stringent penalty. So if you didn't achieve the certain dose value that was associated with that particular metric, the total PQM score would ultimately come out to be 0, regardless of target coverage or how conformal the plan was. So here's another example of another metric, the global max location. And again, this may or may not be important to your physician, but we wanted to test the ability to move dose around. So more specifically, this illustrated the ability to move the overall global max for the plan to a specified location, i.e. the PTV or CTV in this case. Our thought process with this particular assessment was that optimization or using contours in some fashion, you should be able to accomplish this as part of a clinical goal. One of the things that we've learned as a company through supporting multiple physicians across the globe is what is important to many physicians may be unimportant to a select few, and vice versa. But for a professional treatment planner, having the know-how, the knowledge, regardless of what one physician may or may not say, is an important thing to discover and to realize. And those could be essentially important for a variety of potential requests down the road. This is the last example and an interesting one. This is the confirmation number. There are several published indices that we're starting to try to incorporate into our algorithms. Things like the confirmation number, I'll show the formula in a second. Things like the area of regret or peripheral dose, homogeneity index, inhomogeneity index, things like that we're trying to incorporate more into our algorithms with an associated score. So don't let the PQM acronym confuse you. It's simply just quantifying what we evaluate every day, commonly with every plan. For instance, this graphic here shows a sample V or volume-based analysis, and very similar a dose or dose point, a D analysis on a DVH. So based on the information you collect for whatever you're evaluating, a score is essentially generated for submetrics and then totaled up to be the total PQM score. Another example of a submetric was that inhomogeneity index. So this really was more of a tip to tail analysis where you're looking at the max dose to a target minus the min dose over the mean dose, as opposed to the homogeneity index, which is really more discretionary and probably more clinically significant. We like to use this one a lot, the D1% minus the D99% in gray over the prescription dose. And there's some variances on this actual equation. This is what we use to analyze the plans in this case. But ultimately, we're going to be tracking things like this not only with our assessment cases but also with our clinical cases, just to start documenting these. These are good indices to start tracking, and we'll show a real practical example of it from some of the plans that were submitted from the plan challenge very soon. So some of the other indices that we're tracking, the conformality index, this is the total volume in cc's covered by a specific dose over the total volume in cc's of the target ROI. So here's your total target and the isodose line. The problem is that this particular formula doesn't really check to make sure that there's overlap there. What we've found and what we've adopted with most of the assessments and clinical plans that we run is now logging this confirmation number. Again, a little bit more of an elegant formula. It comes from a publication having to do a stereotactic plan analysis. The reason we like it is it shows the relativity of the isodose line coverage with respect to the target. It does a better job of addressing actual overlap, and as this graphic here shows, it actually does a better job of giving you an understanding of how well that particular let's say 95% isodose line wraps around the target. So hopefully this provides a clear understanding of these metrics. There's many more. We'll be posting some future discussions specifically around individual published submetrics that are floating around out there, just to dig in and provide a better analysis on those. Okay, so this takes us to our most recent plan challenge and the data collected. The 2012 ROR plan challenge, we opted to choose and provide 2 disease sites, a lung and an abdomen case. And true to form, we also provided metrics, the prescription and contours for each, both the organ at risks and the targets. A series of pre-survey questions was provided, as well as a tentative timeline, and what's to follow is an overview, really just an overview of the data and the results that were collected. So in previous years, as mentioned before, we announced a winner or a top overall score. As we've gained more insight into the PQM and the resultant scores, we're noticing, especially at the top, many times the effort to achieve those scores sort of deters from what would be representative of the time to achieve a similar plan in the clinic. Without having the same B model and hard constraints on time spent doing the plan, there is somewhat of an honor system at play. We realize that over time, as technology becomes more accessible and the vendors possibly collaborate on this project, some of those elements will be added to the evaluation. For now, it very much is somewhat of an honor system at play. Therefore, we opted to recognize just the 90th percentile finishers in an attempt. This was an attempt to really downplay the idea of a competition and move towards collecting what would be reflective of a real clinical situation. So when you look at the scores at or near the 90th percentile values, the clinically significant differences seem to be almost indistinguishable. In other words, there could be and probably is a point of diminishing returns with trying to hammer out a really high score. So that's what we opted to do this year. Not saying it's right, but that's the way we presented the top finishers this particular go around. So this is a display of the lung case for this year's challenge. Here you can see the GTV and surrounding planning target volume. Also represented are some of the organs at risk that were provided, the spinal cord, the esophagus, the lungs. The lung prescription that was provided, here as it states, we requested that the plan be done according to this protocol, 35 fractions using 6x energy, that the PTV would go to this prescribed dose of 63 gray. Heterogeneity correction to be used, 95% volume of the PTV receiving that prescribed dose, and the plan must be able to be delivered in a 15-minute time frame. This was taken quite literal by some of the plans submitted, specifically the tomotherapy plans. One of the questions that we received was, how do you evaluate beam on time? Well, with the tomotherapy plan submitted, you can easily look at the number of seconds or minutes that it takes that elapses, and some of the top scoring plans that came in were really approaching that 13-14 minute beam on time, and what we had intended was to provide something that really would be clinically significant for a volume of this size and a geometric location such as this. And so in future assessments and challenges, because some of the optimization parameters can be adjusted to extend beam on time and probably raise the overall score, we're going to do a better job of clarifying the intent here. So we actually recognized a little bit more than just the absolute 90th percentile cases. Because of that, there was a couple plans that were really approaching something that probably may not be clinically reflective for a case like this. It was intended to mean setup and patient walking out the door time is what that 15-minute time frame was supposed to say. We'll be posting general metrics used on our website for future reference to avoid dragging the time out on this presentation even longer. And changing gears, this is a display of the abdomen case for this year's challenge. Here you can see the GTV and surrounding planning target volumes again. This was a simultaneous integrated boost plan. Also, with, as this picture shows, what's being represented is not just the targets, but some of the organs at risk that were provided: the kidneys, the bowel, and the liver. Here you can see the abdomen prescription, 26 fractions. We asked that you use 6x energy, and again there was two targets, one going to 5200 and one going to 4680 centigrade. And heterogeneity was requested again to be used, and that 95% volume of the PTV received the prescribed dose. The multiple PTVs seem to be the most challenging on this case, especially in relation to the confirmation number and area of regret metrics. We'll show some examples of that in a second. As we presented earlier, here's a snapshot of the abdomen metrics that went into the overall algorithm. There were 20 metrics specifically in this case, and again 150 max possible score. Some of the organ at risk metrics, such as the kidneys and the stomach, are listed there. This included the heavily weighted target metrics again, and some hard constraints, and also looking at the conformity and global max location. If we zoom in here, the complexity of the metrics are shown more up front. So this shows the targets and the evaluation points used relative to the PQM score. You can note the slope on the upper left-hand metric on the PTV itself. So similar to RTOG protocols, there's an acceptable and meeting desired objective measure. In other words, these were not pass-fail, but points were lost with coverage below 90%. Actually totaling, I think, 0 points, and then there was a very steep decline beyond that 93 and the 92% target coverage. So how did we derive the scores? From years of running this project, it was clear that the current treatment planning systems did not provide us with the metric-based analysis in a vendor-neutral format that we really were seeking. So consequently, we developed our own software to analyze the scores. The first tab in our PQM analysis software is the Beams tab. Because it is vendor neutral and DICOM compatible, we could import, review any plan from all planning systems. In addition to reviewing beam angles, we could review segments, any physical parameter associated with a plan that's common with any plan clinically that you would produce. We could also review the dose distribution in all planes of view. Graphically, we could view conformality, both low and high dose. We can move the dose around. We could locate various structures and the associated dose sampled points. Crucial to any good plan analysis is the dose volume histogram. Examining these plotted dose versus volume points, we have the same overall concept of any treatment planning system review. What our software provided that was unique was the ability to quickly and easily provide something like this, which is our PQM score sheet. In addition to the total score out of 150, which is listed down at the bottom of the scorecard, all of the submetrics that were incorporated into the algorithm are listed with the associated metric result in the first column. And from that metric result and the max possible score, we could rank performance, and it was color coded, so you could easily point out and represent high, intermediate, low performance compared to what was possible. And this was a nice way that we could quickly and easily evaluate all of the plans. This will show it in real time. This movie that's playing is showing, going through the software, looking at the beams themselves, looking at the segments, control points for each beam. So we had the ability, just like with treatment planning system, to look at the total monitor units and the orientation of the couch, whether there was couch kicks or not. We could sample dose points in a three-dimensional world, navigate through all of the planes of view. We could turn on and off all of the structures, and again look at the conformality, both low and high dose. The DVH, again, this is just showing the ability, just like any planning system, to be able to evaluate dose points, turn on and off all of the structures that are listed. And you can see these little bars that are moving. We had a little gradient analysis tool that we could look at the steepness of the curve and how that would relate to the points. So this is showing those scores that were generated and relative to the total score and the performance here. And then we could, with one button click, essentially throw the score into the overall distribution of scores that we had collected up to that point. So this is just an example of a smaller sub distribution that we've worked with in the past. To zoom in on that, to clarify what's represented here, the blue lines are the number of planners or plans submitted on the y-axis in relation to the PQM score on the x-axis. And you can see as you approach 150, those will be the top overall scores. The yellow line represents where one individual score falls in relation to the overall distribution. Again, on this screenshot, it shows you the number of participants, the minimum score, the maximum score, the median, the mean, and the standard deviation relative to that particular assessment. So this takes us to the third leg in our best practices journey, the third out of 4, the integration or study phase. So this phase comprises 2 steps: sharing the data and providing potential areas of improvement. This phase is a connector between the earlier 2 stages, the planning and the data analysis phase, and it connects to the final phase, which is going to be the action phase described shortly. So within this phase is sharing that data. So in this best practices journey, here's the data from the 2012 ROR Plan Challenge. This is a comparison between both the lung and the abdomen data points that were collected. The standard deviation, definitely the difference between these 2 body sites stands out. It is hard to compare other metric to metric numbers with these 2 body sites. It's not really apple to apple. You know, a couple theories on that. The heterogeneity, I think there was some difficulty in the lung case with optimization and driving dose to achieve coverage while maintaining that dose uniformity. And it appears that some planning systems actually handle this in the optimization better than others. Not saying that the high score is not achievable with access to right information. What we are saying is that a variety of challenges and obstacles depending on that treatment planning system are definitely evident, but a high score is still possible. This graph illustrates the previous point. So notice the scores on the far left at 0, which affect greatly the mean overall. This is representing the chord or the hard constraint on the chord. And again, regardless of target coverage or conformality on the plan, not passing that chord metric would result in an overall 0 score. The bottom 10% on the lung seem to come from the Eclipse or Rapid Arc submitted plans. However, we have that is ROR. In our group, we use Eclipse RapidArc all the time, and we have easily achieved high scores on those planning systems and that delivery method. And we can walk through our ROQS program later, which really is intended on providing a mechanism and knowledge on how to achieve high scores in a very efficient way. Basically, what I'm saying is that high scores, again, are possible regardless of the planning system and can be accomplished just with a varying degree of efficiency. You can note at the top here, again, the max score of 144, the median of 126, and the minimum being 0, again, representative of that chord hard constraint. Here's the distribution for the abdomen case, and the overall range of scores was really much tighter. That really, I think, had to do with the heterogeneity factor really not being much of a challenge in the abdomen. The conformance number was a struggle. We'll show some practical examples of what that means. Again, across the top you can see the minimum score listed, the max of 145 for this particular case out of 150. The median was 130, and the standard deviation was lower than the lung, and it was around 10. This slide here illustrates the PQM score versus various planning systems. Some key points to point out. The blue represents the max score. The mean is represented in red, and the minimum score in green. So again, this is for the lung case, and across the bottom we listed all the systems combined together, and then Elekta, Varian, the Philips planning system, and tomotherapy. And the box in the top right hand corner lists all of the specific actual numbers there. And the similar graph for the abdomen, I think what is represented here, at least our takeaway, is that a high PQM score is achievable in all planning systems. Just having access to that the right information, there is going to be variance in the efficiency to achieve those scores and the methods used. But again, the max score being represented in blue, the mean score being represented in red, and the minimum score here in green. The standard deviation is lower, as we pointed out already, due to probably the heterogeneity factor being somewhat insignificant or not much of a challenge. For the lung case, this shows the PQM versus confidence level with IMRT or VMAT planning ability. In other words, prior to the plan submission and scoring, a question was asked on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being most confident, to rank the confidence level in this type of planning. Interesting to note, all of the 4s and the PQM score, I think, stand out. With the lung, it seemed as if everyone that submitted a plan had a moderate to high confidence in their ability. I think this is showing, as is the abdomen graph of the same data points, this is a similar collection. I think this is really just showing that the confidence level really is statistically insignificant, that is, one's confidence in their ability may not necessarily be correlated to the PQM score, at least for this particular set of plans, and we noticed that for last year as well. This data collected here is showing the overall workload in the department relative to the lung plans submitted, so the PQM versus IMRT or VMAT plans per month within their department. A high score is achievable, I think, regardless of overall workload in the department, I think, is our takeaway from looking at this data here, and that the R value, as the R value there suggests, as with the abdomen case, that again, regardless of the workload, heavy or light, it's to achieve a high PQM score is really not statistically significant or related to the overall workload within the department, at least for these cases here. In other words, a high score is achievable regardless of the overall workload in the department. This illustrates the submitted static IMRT plans and the most common beam angles used. As you can see from this graph, the highest score used 7 beams, but more beams didn't necessarily mean a better plan. Again, this illustrates the submitted VMAT lung plans and the most common number of beam angles used. As you can see on the highest scoring plan, the Eclipse RapidArc plan, it used 2 arcs. And with the abdomen case, this illustrates the same thing from the lung case that the most common beam angles used ranged anywhere from 6 to 10 beams, 6 to 9 beams. As you can see from this graph, the highest score on this particular data set used 8 beams. Again, more beams does not necessarily mean a better or higher PQM score. And then the last slide talking about beam angles looks at the arcs used on the VMAT plan submitted for the abdomen case, and again the highest score used 2 arcs. For the publication, we're going to be attempting to take a deeper dive with the number of beams, the PQM score, and the overall efficiency that's associated. This slide here shows the combination of monitor units for both of the plans relative to the PQM score. Takeaway from this again was it's not necessary to really have high monitor units to achieve high scores, and we noticed the same kind of trend last year. This lays out the PQM score versus years of experience. This is always a good one, and again, high scores I would say would be achievable regardless of the years of experience. This is the lung case specifically. We're seeing this in many industries. The technology and amount of information that's available, it doubles every 2-3 years, and it really has flattened this quote-unquote expertise marketplace. A better measure would be probably to look at efficiency and how it correlates to PQM score and with the number of years of experience. That definitely interests us. We've been in the field a long time. We know there's tremendous value to having spent time in the trenches, so to speak, and placing emphasis on years of experiences is important. And this would be the same as the previous. Again, it would be interesting to note once we add a complexity or some type of efficiency index and the possible time constraints involved in the planning process and how that relates to the overall years of experience. A similar message here, CMD versus non-CMD, the CMD being represented in red, the blue is the non-CMD. I would say that when you look at the data table, that high scores or scores near the 90th percentile are achievable either way, but in this particular case doesn't guarantee high scores either. Again, this is not to discredit the importance of being certified, going through the certification process. We feel strongly in the importance of having those measures in place. This is just a deeper analysis of potentially things that could be incorporated to enhance a certification process down the road. Some type of practical review. Same as the previous with the CMD versus non-CMD. This looks at the PQM score versus the training or background of the individual participating. So as changes in the requirements become mandated for providing medical dosimetry services, how do those changes, how do they reflect to the plan quality score? And there's a data point that's hard to see on here at 104 in the 144 bucket for JCERT individual. So the table on the left shows these values a little bit more clearly. You can read the max for each JCERT, non-JCERT, and on-the-job training, as well as the minimum score, the mean score, and the standard deviation of the number of plans submitted. Changing gears again, this is just some interesting trends to note. So the most common static beam arrangements again was anywhere from 6 to 9 or 7 to 9 beams. At least 2 arcs was always the most common, especially with the higher PQM score plans for the VMAT plans that were submitted. Most of the plans submitted were coplanar. We had a few that were non-coplanar, and those would be some interesting things to look at. We did ask this time around that a 2 millimeter calc grid or a fine dose calc on tomotherapy be used, so that the scores that were anticipated or being looked at in the planning system would be reflective of the independent software we were using to evaluate and collect and report the scores. So having the finer dose grid was a new request this year. Looking at this non-coplanar aspect where you have couch kicks in relation to the gantry, there is this question about efficiency. So is it necessary to have non-coplanar beams to achieve a high score? And I think we noticed that really it's not required or not necessary to have non-coplanar beams to achieve the highest scores possible. We'll be looking at and trying to investigate ways to add some type of complexity index to measure efficiency next year that would incorporate things like beam on time, monitor units, the delivery setup. It's going to be probably a daunting task, but we're trying to look at ways to incorporate those measures into this program, and also our assessment service that we sell commercially. This is a trend that we noticed with the best lung plans that were submitted. I would say overall that avoiding the contralateral dose to the opposite lung, the way that the algorithm and the submetrics were scripted, the plans that avoided that area the best, I think, trended on the high end of the scores that were tallied. Areas of potential improvement. So areas that trended to be on the low end of the overall PQM scores, these were some of the main struggle points: the overall quote-unquote hotness of the plan, the lack of target coverage, and looking at the low and high dose conformality. There tended to be a lot of dose spraying off, and we looked at this particular metric, the confirmation number. So this was relative, I believe, to the abdomen plan, and you can see that's what's circled on the left is a very low confirmation number. Now this low confirmation number in its metric form may mean little to an individual, that is the actual numeric number, or even a physician reviewing a plan on its own, but what about compared to a distribution of what's achievable? That takes on a much different meaning and has a much greater impact, knowing what's achievable. And even to take it one step further, that same plan, that same conformance number represented graphically on the dose distribution, and you can see very clearly the lack of conformality. So these numbers that appear, these indices in the publications, that somewhat we know that they're important, but I think a lot of times in the clinic get overlooked or not used as much as they should, and practically they do make sense. Other trends, so looking at the highest scoring plans, we've got this question a lot: can you present more screenshots from some of the higher scoring plans? So we've done this in this presentation here. I think consistently higher scoring plans tended, of course, to have really good target coverage because that was heavily weighted. We noticed and talked to individuals that submitted the high scoring plans, the overall use, the consistent use, and something that we use a lot with gradient margins. So the abdomen plan that had 2 targets, using defined gradient margins with optimization contours to try to control the dose with the high and low targets abutting each other. Having that approach with your contours before hitting the optimization tended to be a common thing with not only controlling the conformality but also being equivalent to a high PQM score. I would say with the Pinnacle users, using concentric rings was a common theme. Use of directional or complete blocks on tomotherapy was a common theme with the higher PQM scores. Use of contours and the NTO feature on the Eclipse, both with static IMRT and rapid arc, and then again post-optimization using contours to go back and clean up hot areas of the plan tended to be a common theme from not only things that we do internally, but in talking to some of the individuals that submitted plans. This is a submitted plan from an ROR colleague. We don't talk about this a lot in our presentations, but this is just to show an example of the importance of using gradient margins for multiple targets. So we have the dose shut down to around the 95% volume for the low dose PTV on this abdominal case, and you can see the conformality that's there. So the blue cyan line represents the PTV target, and then the dose that's literally just wrapped around that target. Now take this same data set, same PTV, same prescription, same parameters, and a submitted plan. This dose color wash shows the overall dose value turned on at the same level as that previous view. So let me kick back to this view, and then now back to the submitted plan with the cyan blue being the target again. This was a PQM score that had less than 100 value, and the confirmation number was really low. And so you can see the dose streaking here. And when we look at the actual confirmation number for those two plans, the ROR plan on the far right with the confirmation of 0.738, and then the low confirmation plan that we just showed and the value of 0.15. Again, those numbers on their own really don't mean a lot, but when you look at them graphically, they start to make a lot more sense. This is a top Eclipse PQM score, Eclipse static IMRT plan. You can note the high dose control. Here we wanted to throw some screenshots in of some of the highest scoring plans. This is the top Pinnacle static IMRT plan. Again, noting the conformality. The top Monaco plan that was submitted, high dose control, again being a common theme. And when you looked at these DVHs and the whether it was high dose or low dose, shut on or off, you really couldn't tell huge differences between the planning systems, which is encouraging, and that goes back to the point with the bar graphs. So not only numeric wise, but graphically you're seeing a lot of similarities. The point being, with access to the right information and tools, that a high PQM score is achievable regardless of the planning system. There'll obviously be different levels of efficiency embedded in there, and this is same was true for the abdominal cases. This is a top Eclipse IMRT plan with a high PQM score, and this is a RapidArc plan that was submitted for the abdomen. One thing to note with the RapidArc and the VMAP plans and general tomotherapy plans is the low dose sparing that seems to be evident, and probably throughput would be another common advantage. This is the top Pinnacle SmartArc plan, similar to RapidArc, and again finishing up with the Tomo plan that was submitted. The low dose sparing is something that we talked about with the GYN case and the IMRT plans a couple years ago with looking at bone marrow sparing, the emphasis being on the lower end of the scale in the V10, V15, V20 ranges. Those types of values trend on the easier side to achieve with some of the VMAP plans. And so that would be one thing that we noticed a lot, not only with our clinical plans, but with this project. So there have been several good questions that have come in. We've tried to add more examples of high versus low scoring plans and the highest scoring plans. Ultimately, there is no perfect recipe. I mean, that's one thing we can honestly say. What works for one planning system or machine or beam model may not work for others. However, we have incorporated universal philosophies and individualized programs with our ROQS assessment and continuous learning platform. Our ROQS program that we commercially sell operates in this context of trying to remove fear, working together, sharing information in this best practices world for not just validation but potentially improvement. And our main focus is not just decreasing variability but also providing very efficient ways to produce high quality plans. Specifically with the plan challenge, we learn as much as we share with this project year after year. One example of the many things we learn in this process would be what we learned this year with sampling data points on a DVH. When you independently look at data points outside of the inherent planning system, there is the possibility of not always getting a fine resolution line as what's shown here when you're sampling points. Sometimes, depending on where you're falling on a very steep gradient DVH, this thick bar here represents an area where we're sampling dose points, and depending on the resolution that's used and the planning system that's used, there could be what's reported in an independent piece of software, a huge difference in what's expected because of that steep gradient. So we've incorporated some different measures in evaluating the plans, some updates to future projects and our assessment program. We've included improved evaluation metrics. We've added this thing that we've called a grace percentage, which is more of a tolerable, allowable limit that's allowed. It provides a window when we're sampling those dose points on the steep gradients to not penalize the plans as severely. And it's something that we incorporated into our software that's really we can independently move depending on what we're evaluating. We're adding these other metrics, the homogeneity index, the inhomogeneity index, the conformity indices, and we're looking at a way to possibly use this idea of a complexity index for next year. So what does all this objective benchmarking mean practically? When we're looking at practical applications for this type of a process or benchmarking, we can not only evaluate and reduce variability and increase the mean overall quality, but ultimately, and what's most important, is hopefully improving patient outcomes through all of this, what's expected anyway from what we're producing. And one of the things practically that could come out of this is, imagine a day where a job interview, you're interviewing a candidate and not just looking at the years of experience or the initials after their name, but actually having a practical assessment of how they're doing on complex cases compared to their peers. And these are all things that could be coming down the road. I think that, as this article here states from UCLA, they make a pretty powerful statement here, which says using plan quality metrics and things like what we've talked about through this presentation, it provides an opportunity to potentially use quote unquote tighter criteria than national standards or projected criteria. And so what that means is we can start looking for ways to really achieve the optimality with our planning processes. Within this phase of data sharing, this question is an important one. How do I compare to my peers? In this case, providing some level of guidance on next steps, or even just a validation of where one stands. Through ROR's commercial assessment and training platform, we accomplish a lot of this feedback through our customized reports. And so this following movie will show what the finishers in the 90th percentile actually received. This is a staple of our ROQS program and a nice takeaway for those that finish with high PQM scores in this particular challenge. And so what this is showing is the full customized report with the dose distribution and the table of contents, the breakdown in the distribution and scores, a recommendation for potential areas of improvement, and then a whole series of pages, 20 to 30 pages long, outlining each individual submetric and where this particular individual ranked or scored for each one, the summary of all of the dose statistics and volume statistics that were relevant for that particular metric. But overall, this report just gives a nice summary of all the things that were anticipated in the clinical goals up front, and then how the resulting scores were portrayed. And so again, this report here is a staple of our ROQS program, and this is a list here of those individuals that ranked in the 90th percentile that actually received those individual customized reports. Again, this is the top 10% for abdomen plans that were submitted. We had top scores from last year actually rank in the 90th percentile for this particular plan challenge, which was assuring to see that the consistency was there, both with not only the individuals but also the construction of the metrics themselves. We had plans that were submitted and finished in the top 90th percentile here, not only from the United States but from Hong Kong, and actually 2 plans from a center in India. In addition to these countries, we had participants from Australia, Canada, Malaysia, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Algeria, Romania, Spain, Turkey, Germany, Singapore, Russia, and the UK. So you can see the scope of the project has definitely grown, and the interest level exceeds far beyond our borders here. And that truly is what best practices aims to do, is get involvement from as many institutions and clinicians as possible. Here's the 90th percentile finishers for the lung case. We had top 90th percentile finishers not only from the United States but also from Australia. And we'll be listing these individuals on our website and other forums as well, but we want to recognize them for their achievement here on this presentation. As we finish this best practices journey and what we've learned through this process is that ultimately we, as that is the human beings in this process, are the largest source of variation. And when you talk about contouring and treatment planning, because of all of the things that go into that process, this study from Palicki et al. Sort of points this statement out that humans are the largest source of routine variation in radiation oncology. But when you look at a continuous improvement program, as with any source of variability, by using metrics and a metric-based assessment coupled with a true continuous improvement program, measured improvement is the ultimate goal and quite often the results that you see. So at the end of the day, we're ultimately investing in what truly matters, and that's our people. By incorporating these ideals, we will use the technology that's within our industry the way it's supposed to be used and be able to decrease things like variability and increase efficiency. So as my 3-year-old would ask on any long journey, are we there yet? We've approached this last leg in the 4-part journey here, which is the action phase. Typically, this is a detailed action plan and a resubmission of work based on recommendations for improvement, and that's an important part, the final piece of the best practices journey. And this is an important element of our ROQS commercial program. It involves a reassessment and really sort of building on the things that we learned through the benchmarking process. A group such as the ACR and their examination of department protocols and procedures, there's an ever-increasing focus on quality improvement. The word in the top left used in this continual improvement program out of UNC, this word Kaizen, it's a Japanese word that basically refers to the fact that we should never, in a continuous improvement program, we should never be at a point where enough is enough. In other words, where we say as clinicians, you know what, I know everything there is to know, I'm done learning. That should never happen, and that's what a true continuous improvement program really should be about. We actually use this system, our ROC system within our own company at ROR to benchmark our own planners anytime we have software upgrades or new systems that we want to evaluate or to cross-train onto different platforms. We use this process to benchmark and look for opportunities to improve. So in other words, to take a score that may be at or slightly below the mean and look for ways that we can provide training and a learning platform to through a focus on efficiency to improve that score overall. And so we're at this final endpoint of the journey, and the question is, have we achieved this concept of best practices? And as the title of the talk suggests, best practices is not an endpoint or a noun. It's a verb. It's a process, and really this process is a journey, a continuous improvement model. And it's not, when we go back to this image of this road, it's not an end state goal or a destination that ends. It's a continuous loop of learning that's really infinite. And each time we circle around through this process, the goals and the benchmark values constantly are shifting and improving. At least that should be the overall mission of a continual improvement program. And that's what this guy here believed and taught. He's most well known for working within quality systems in manufacturing and other industries, and W. Edwards Deming used statistical data and variation to implement opportunities for improvement. And in a nutshell, his model, Deming's model, which is very well known in the quality world, quality improvement world, it was focused on designing a plan, implementing that plan, studying the results that come in, and looking for opportunities for improvement. It's how we've constructed our continual improvement program called ROQS here at ROR. And essentially we've modified this plan, do, study, act terminology to be more focused on dosimetry and what a professional treatment planner needs. So looking at a metric-based assessment, providing objective benchmarking, based on that benchmarking, providing a means of personalized learning, and then based on that recommendation, looking and measuring that improvement. And again, our program that we're offering as a service is called ROQS, ROQS, and definitely get engaged with us. We invite you to connect with us and provide feedback with how we can improve, or possibly just help answer any questions through any of these forums. And again, I want to thank you again for your time and viewing this presentation from ROR. You can contact us here at this email address at the bottom of the screen, and we look forward to partnering with you on future projects.